what ML Detect does, it actually creates a machine learning model from the point you actually enable the machine learning profile for your account, which means every device which is connecting to AWS IoT will have the capability to understand the anomaly, right, which is happening on the device.
Welcome, everyone, to the Tech Guide podcast, where we give actual advice to those wanting to break into tech or looking for their next gig. We have Syed Rehan on the podcast. Welcome, Syed. Super excited to have you on today.
Thank you, Ryan, and I'm glad to be here. It's super fun to speak to young, upcoming tech individuals like yourself and to the crowd who's probably listening to this podcast. And I'm looking forward to all the questions and sharing my wisdom and my journey, how you basically can get started and you can pivot if you want to pivot.
Yes, and you're going to be the perfect person to do that because you are a well-known author, speaker. You've written AWS workshops. You've presented at AWS events, and you're a founding member of the AOS IoT organization in the European region. That is so sick. But I want to go back to your early life. Let's rewind a little bit. Can you take us
Yes.
to your early life and tell us a little bit more of like, where did this love for like technology come from? Because you've been in it your whole life. So I'm curious, early stages.
Well, this is a very interesting story. I think partially, I kind of blame my father, but in a way it's a blessing as well. So I actually applied to become a doctor, right? Medical doctor.
Hmm.
So I remember my father bought x86 Windows 3.1 machine, right? And he bought it from his friend and he said to me, "Hey, we got this computer, see if you can fix it." Right. And I always had this curiosity that I like to work backwards, break things and put it together. So obviously it was hardware. It's not something which I've experienced before. We had RAM, we had hardware.
Yeah.
I looked at it and I was like, okay, why are we stuck on a blue screen of death? Windows 3.1, right? It never had actually blue
Yep.
screen of death, but it was, you had to type in some commands to obviously get going if it crashed. So I played with it and I tried so many help options. I fiddled with a lot of commands. I get it going. And then my father took it back to his friend and he said, actually, he's giving you another one, right? And then this time he's got Windows 95. And I was like, very nice. Okay. So now basically got me started. I got curious that Windows 95, the first thing I did, right? I actually, there was a magazine called Linux Format Magazine in UK, right? So I went to the shop and I bought the magazine because they used to come with floppy disk way back. And they had like four floppy disk running Red Hat 6.0, I think 6.0. So I said, you know what? I've seen this Windows. All they have is Solitaire, Minesweeper. I'm bored of it. So I installed Red Hat in it. So that was actually a challenge on its own because obviously you have to put next disk, you have to format it, you have to use partition, you have to make sure the master bootloader is correct and everything like that.
Yep.
So that got me started on a journey. So I actually went through a rabbit hole writing Python script, right? Sorry, not Python, Bash script to make sure the bootloader opens correctly. So I basically started it. I set it up. Then I had to set up X. There was at those days, right? Having an internet data was commodity, right? And if you remember among us who are actually from my era, we remember that you had to set up a modem which will connect and it will make noise. And then once that's connected, you do not get phone call, right? So
Interesting.
yeah, my dad never used to get phone call and he was very angry that why the call is not coming. Then he realized I'm actually consuming data. It was one of those days where 1 MB literally could take me, in fact, easily we're talking about half an hour to 45 minutes, right?
Oh my.
And, so I get to a point where I was like, okay, fine, I'm not going to use the internet because it's very expensive. And we had those days where AOL used to give free CDs to say, okay, use our system. But that
Yeah.
system never actually had, the computer I'm talking about never actually had a CD. It used USBs. So I got really irritated. I started reading man pages. So among us who use Linux or Unix, there's something called manual pages, but the command to get into is man pages. So I read those man pages. I got started. I installed C++ compiler, GNU compiler. And let's put it this way. I said to my father, I can't basically be a doctor because I think I enjoy this and I'm going to do this. My father said to me, look, I know from the era my father came from, and he told me that there is no respect for people in IT what are you talking about? You're going to be basically trying to basically make earning without knowing that what the world is out there is going to be like. And you should be a doctor because human body always needs people to look after their body. So I said, look, I can't, so I have to make something. I said to him, look, I can't take bloods, right? And he said,
Yeah.
look, we have everybody highly educated in our family, and you were the first one. We were hoping that you would go from my sons who will become a doctor. And I said, look, let me give it a shot, okay? If
Yep.
I basically don't get anywhere with it, so I'll basically give up and I'll basically become a doctor, right? So he gave me a time and he said, okay, I'm going to give you 6 months. Um, Go ahead and show me what you could do. So I was actually still in college that time. So college, I don't know what the equivalent of that in US, but it was a college time. So I was nearly about 16 and a half. And I basically went for a company which they were asking for technical developer. They were actually looking for a C++ developer. I said, well done. I can do C++. And I was
Yep.
actually had piles of book for C. So I started doing programming for those guys, and then they never used to pay me. It was a kind of intern job. So I went to my dad and said, "Look, they're not paying me, but there's a prospect out there." So my dad said to me, "Okay, fine. If you're telling me there's a prospect out there, and you think you can make it without basically making me feel ashamed that you're not going to be a doctor, then let's see what happens." Long story short, from there, I basically progressed to become a full stack developer for those guys. I wrote the company's
Cool.
website, and my dad was like, okay, now they're paying you? I said, yes, they're paying me. And then he said, okay, fine, pursue whatever you want, because obviously that's your future, your life, but I
That's
want the
amazing.
best for you. If you think that giving up medical field because you actually have an option of going to do medicine, you wouldn't be able to do that afterwards because you're going to get busy with your life. So long story short, I pivoted at an early stage in my life with my father. And yeah, here we are.
I think that's so cool because, like, I feel like, yes, you had this external pressure to, like, be a doctor, be a doctor, be a doctor, just, like, pounding down on you, but you really felt like followed your heart into doing
Yeah.
something that you love doing. Is
Yeah.
basically, like, coding.
Yeah.
And I wanna
Exactly.
talk about that as well. Yeah, because like,
Mm,
your early career, you had, like, a few different roles of, like, being a software engineer, solution architect, being, like, a solution designer,
mm.
and but then recently, or not so recently, you basically made the move into cybersecurity, which is like a super hot field. Everyone wants to be in cybersecurity right now. There are so many reasons to be in cybersecurity.
Yeah.
Can you take us like through that progression of, yeah, I had all these different roles, but now I'm landed out of cybersecurity. Can you take us through that journey a little bit?
So actually, when I basically became a C++ engineer, we're talking about way back in 2005, 2005. Yeah, I was working for a company called WEMS Limited. Excuse me. And at the same time, I was actually doing my degree in university. I remember those was the days when networking, well, computers were using Windows NT. And I'm going to try to basically be as conservative as I can because I don't want to basically give away the fact that there were things. Okay, let's put it this way. I'll try to be open as much as I can. I became an ethical hacker, right? And
Mm,
how I became an ethical hacker is because when I started doing C++ programming, right? They told me that, hey, go ahead, install LAMP stack, LAMP, which is Linux, Apache, MySQL, PHP. Way back, we're talking about
mm.
2005. I don't know whether people still use LAMP or not. So basically he turned around and I was basically doing a 1 year internship while I was in the university. So it went two ways. I went to the company. I was basically doing the job there. It was literally they were paying me for my travels. Um and I realized that when I was coding actually in C++, I was actually writing firmware for microcontrollers. These cameras which are used by soccer players in their houses, security systems, all of this was written in C++. So I wrote it.
That's
Then I
cool.
realized that all this data I'm basically, creating, I created the server for them. I wrote the server. I've set it up everything, the whole complete stack.
Yep.
And once I basically set up the C++ environment, I realized that the system can actually crash if you do not do correct memory allocation, because obviously in C++ is better, but in C
Yeah.
is worse, right? You got to do memory allocation and deallocation and whatnot. So part of the firmware was written in C and part of it was written in C++. So the
Yep.
C firmware, actually, when I was testing it, crashed. That got my curiosity peaked. I basically start testing it. I wrote a program to see that, okay, how can we identify the memory allocation and how can we identify the memory location? So when I
Mm.
started reading the memory location, actually I was reading some sensitive system data. So I realized that, okay, this is not good. So I informed, because at that time we're talking about 2005, where
Yeah.
all of these development stack were actually writing unencrypted on the volatile memory. When we're talking about volatile memory as computer memory RAM, right? And then I got
Mhm.
hold of the data and I said to him, this is not good. We give hold of the data. So I said to the director, and the director was like, okay, you go ahead and fix it. We're going to pay you for it to fix it. That's where I got the taster of understanding how to break things in an ethical way. While at the same time, while I was in university, my manager actually sent me an email. My professor actually sent me an email because I was studying and working together. So my professor said to me, hey, this is the email, everybody deliver us, right? But I was actually using Linux and I was using text-based email reader. And in those email reader, we had a metadata. So I looked at the metadata and that was actually disclosing the key, which was signing the authentication for the professor. So I said to the professor, look, and I went to his, by the way, when I did this, I did it ethically. I went to him and I said, look, I've got a Linux machine here. I don't know what computer you're using. I think he was using Novell or something at that time. And I said, look,
Yep.
I've got this Linux machine here. I've got your metadata here. And I can basically emulate and log in as you, right? I can read your messages. I can read, and and he was like, "Oh, this is amazing. This is outstanding. You found a security loophole." So he obviously informed the email server IT staff and IT support. So this is where I actually realized, oh, hold on a minute, there are more to it than just a standalone machines. So I started
Interesting.
on the journey as an ethical hacker, and
That's
I
cool.
did took part in few challenges where we do hacking sessions ethically. So yeah, that's where we started from.
Interesting. And I kind of want to talk a little bit more, pivot to a little bit of like cybersecurity and people that do it like unethically. Because cybersecurity is
Yeah.
obviously $1 trillion industry. I mean, can you put a number on to how really hone in the importance of cybersecurity for a company like AWS or even like any of these huge, like how important it really is in some sort of quantifiable way?
So let's put it this way. The CTO of Amazon clearly says that dance like nobody's watching, right? And
Hmm.
secure like everybody's watching. So if I were to basically put it, I can't say better than that. And from AWS perspective, security is absolutely prime, is job zero,
Yeah.
right? We will actually drop everything if it basically has any security issues, everything. So
Amazing.
it's a, from AWS perspective, it's absolutely critical to have job zero when it comes to security.
Yeah. And I'm curious when people are like doing these data breaches or trying to do some sort of data attacks or cyber attacks, what do they look for like when they are trying to do like a cybersecurity attack? Because you always hear about like hospitals, like some of these huge companies. Oh, we were like I had a cybersecurity attack, but like what do these like hackers like really like target when they did that? Just out of curiosity.
So there's a lot of malicious characters, or I should say, I mean, we refer to as malicious actors. These are the
Mm,
people who are basically doing this for one or two reasons. So first reason is always financial reason.
yep.
And second reason is basically they just want to basically show the company that they're smarter than you and their security is not safe enough, right? I mean, when I was basically working for, this reminds me of a story when I was working for Nokia way
Mm,
back in 2008. And at that time, I remember in Nokia, I was actually writing a H.264 hardware codec as a mobile leader in Finland. And one of the key things they basically said, okay, we're writing a codec. We need to make sure it's not reversible, right? And we also need
mm,
to make sure we can basically set it up as IP. So other companies who are going to take it or inherit it, basically going to charge us or will pay
interesting.
us so we can charge them. Now, at that time, obviously the internet wasn't that fast, but internet was there.
Yeah.
We had to make sure that people who are actually, in fact, even working locally within the country are able to do something called bastion jump. And
Mm,
bastion jump is like you basically connect to interim server, and then from interim server, you jump into another server. This is where you're hosting your IP or privileged code. And we always, often, I used to hear it from the company a lot, is that there has been a lot of port scanning, a lot of DDoS attacks to basically bring this server down so they can bypass and get to the main server, which is holding the code. Um, Again, this is the job of a security engineer, which I
Yeah.
was involved at that time as well, to make sure we keep these bad actors out.
Interesting. Yeah, and I'm like curious, like how do you keep the bad actors out? Is it all through like code, or what are some of the ways that like someone in a cybersecurity role, no matter the company they're at, they're trying to keep all these bad people out? Is it all through like code, or like what are some of the best practices that like people
Yeah.
can
So that's
use?
a good question. That's a very good question. So I mean, if we talk about now, right, we have something called machine learning. We have something called AI. There are facilities and tools and features out there. For example, if I take, for example, of AWS,
Yeah,
AWS has, I won't say the numbers, but
yeah,
millions of devices connected to the cloud, right? And all of these millions and billions and trillions of devices, I'm not trying to give a number. I'm just trying to make sure it's vivid.
that's okay.
So the amount that devices which are connected to AWS, we actually provide something called AWS IoT Device Defender ML Detect. Now,
Mm,
what ML Detect does, it actually creates a machine learning model from the point you actually enable the machine learning profile for your account, which means every device which is connecting to AWS IoT will have the capability to understand the anomaly, right, which is happening on the device, which means
what?
which means if there's any issue on the device, as a human, you might not be able to detect it immediately, but the machine learning will. And that's where I think now these days, where we actually are in a world of time where machine learning is so involved and so important, you need to basically use the power of machine learning to enable the security for your devices. And this is where it can take remediate action without a human intervention. Excuse me.
That is incredible. I've never even like really thought of what. Yeah, let's talk about the future of that then. Like machine learning being used in cybersecurity. I mean, can you talk a little bit more about like where you think the future of like machine learning will be incorporated with cybersecurity? I think that is such a cool topic.
Yeah, so it is actually a cool topic, but it is a so in-depth topic.
Mm,
I'm gonna struggle to go deeper than obviously the time we have. But to give you an overview, I will say, hmm, to give you an overview, I will say amount of data humans and devices are actually creating, right? Where there's a connectivity data without a flow of data or information, what we're trying to consume on our devices, on our mobile phones, on our routers, or anything which is connected, right?
yep.
All of this data, firstly, needs to be secured end to end with the cloud, right? Now, the encryption happens using a TLS protocol, for example, right? Authentication needs to be done with the private key or some form of authentication. You can use that on the TPM on the hardware side, or basically you can use PKI to have a non TPM based or have a software based TPM. This is where your end credentials are secure once the connection is done. But that's the start of the journey. The
Yeah.
data which you have, you can take the data from cloud perspective and create a machine learning model. This is where I was referring to AWS IoT Device Defender ML Detect. What it actually does, it creates a machine learning model for you and actually notifies you that, for example, if the device has become chatty, which could mean somebody has tried to breach the device, or the device has been irresponsive, it's not been responding anymore. That means that somebody had basically breached the device and is not been connecting anymore. Or it could be the fact that somebody's actually got hold of the device. So you have all of these parameters, right? They
It's
are
so cool.
There's a lot of parameters which machine learning ML detect will take, and it will basically take the data and say, okay, I remember based on the historic data, the pattern was, let's say, just like this, right? It was a straight linear line. Now, I have noticed from last 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours, the pattern is very spiky because somebody is sending a lot of irregular data. It could be the fact that somebody tried to get hold of your phone or router or whatever connected device, right? And they're trying to breach through the system. And this is where if a human was sitting there, he would be like, okay, I can see in same amount of data is coming, same amount of data is going. But the machine learning will identify the anomaly. So we call it anomaly because let's say if the normal pattern of Ryan connecting, coming in, turning his light off because he's connected to the cloud, his IoT device, or he's using his smart TV connecting and using, I don't know, Netflix or Amazon Prime Video or whatever, because you have a normal, humans have regular pattern. However, if somebody is basically trying to hold off your smart home devices, right, and trying to breach in, they're gonna show irregular pattern. And this can be detected by machine learning. And that's what I mean by machine learning will basically detect this well before we actually can analyze that this actually has happened. Because what will happen, the machine learning will take this, it will detect it, and it will basically push it out and show you the notification that this actually has happened. And you can basically take the immediate action, i.e., you could take the device and isolate from all of your network and remedify to figure it out whether it's actually a software issue or somebody else got hold of the device and whatnot. I have had situation in the past where customer came to me and said, okay, one of the devices basically behaving very irregularly, and I can see that this basically sending the data. What has happened? So I worked with the customer deeply. Yeah, we basically investigated it, and it turned out that somebody basically got hold of their firmware because their engineer basically made a mistake of disclosing some of the information on Stack Overflow or GitHub,
Oh,
and this basically got leaked out, and they basically used that little snippet, right? A little snippet to breach their firmware and try to go hold of other devices which is connected to their firmware. For example, if they have a smart home hub which has a light
yeah.
bulb connected, a door lock connected, and they try to breach that smart hub to make sure they can control it. But a machine learning AWS IoT device defender ML detect was able to identify the anomaly, showing that this device has become chatty and is responsive in a very irregular manner. And that's where they got notified and they took a remediate action by isolating the device, remediating the device by uploading the firmware, reversing it, making any action which was happened, uploading their source code, uploading the firmware
So
all across
cool.
the devices, and it was secured.
That is so, so cool. I think it's so cool that the machine learning can just, like you said, isolate it to and then basically cut it off and remedy it. That is so sweet. And I want to talk a little bit as we kind of wind down here to like career advice. So someone's
Yeah.
listening to this, they're like, oh my God, like that is the coolest thing I want to That is so cool. Like I want to get into cybersecurity. I want to get like machine learning. Can you talk to us about like different ways that you can get into cybersecurity? It sounds like you took a traditional route like software engineering, but can you tell us a little bit more about a non-traditional way that someone could get into cybersecurity?
So I think the Amazon leadership, I love Amazon leadership principles, and I'm going to take a leaf from the leadership principles. And Amazon
Like it.
leadership principle says that learn and be curious, right?
Mm,
And if you basically are always going to be learn and be curious, you're going to make your way regardless,
yeah.
right? Whether it's a startup, whether it's a large enterprise, whoever it is, you need to be learn and be curious. You need to basically work backwards and you need to make sure you invent and simplify. For example, if there's a problem in front of you and you think that, okay, I'm basically, I don't know, an engineer or I'm somebody else who's not in the right field. If you show
Yeah.
competency, then you can basically convince anybody to make sure that they can give you a job or breakthrough. So my key gateway is that giveaway is learn and be curious.
Learn and be curious. I like it. And what resources would you give to someone? Would it be like doing like an AWS workshop to learn more about cybersecurity or like where if someone's saying they're like, okay, like I can do that, but like where should I start at? Like where would you direct them to?
Yeah. So that's a great question, right? Because we are living in an age of information. There's like tons of information out there. if you if you are basically starting, there's plenty of courses which are free and there's plenty of workshops. So I mean, for example, if you want to learn more about zero trust, you can go to a website of which I've authored. It's called AWS IoT Zero Trust Workshop.com, right? That workshop will basically guide you through the zero trust principles and how you basically can learn about the zero trust principles. I have a lot of customers who come
Interesting.
and say, okay, I know what zero trust is, but how can I implement it? So you can basically take that and implement it and learn it, then how does zero trust works? Because we basically
Mhm.
designed this workshop from a NIST principle. NIST is a cybersecurity organization in the United States. And we took the NIST principles and implemented this workshop using zero trust and their principles to guide um, somebody who doesn't have any hands-on knowledge for
Yeah.
cybersecurity, but learn the zero trust way, how you basically can implement cybersecurity. Cybersecurity is a very vast field. You need to basically take a vertical, work on that, then build and broaden your knowledge base.
Interesting. Can you talk a little bit more about that? What do you mean by a vertical? Do you mean like an industry or what do you mean by
No, no.
that?
So what I mean is that, for example, if we have a zero trust, right? We also
Yeah.
have something called SIEM, which is security information event management systems. Then we also have
Okay.
something called XDR. We also have something called SOAR. All of these
Mhm.
are different verticals or areas. I should say, maybe you're right. I should say areas within cybersecurity, because all of these are different categories of cybersecurity where
Mm.
you're actually targeting. So what I would basically, if I were to reword the phrase, I would say, learn a single category first, get a complete understanding on the category, and then build on the foundational knowledge of others. So for example, if you start with the workshop, you will basically understand zero trust, right? How does
Mm.
zero trust principles work? How you basically can mitigate actions on using AWS IoT services and whatnot. The key point to remember here is that the zero trust principle doesn't change regardless of which service or cloud provider you use. The only thing what you need to keep in mind is that zero trust is essentially basically not trusting anybody connecting to your environment. But you learn that how is basically done hands-on in this workshop. And once you basically use that, you learn the capability of what zero trust is. Then you need to explore what SIEM is. And then you need to
Mm.
look at what SOAR is, SOAR is, right? They need to look at XDR. All of these are different categories within cybersecurity, targeting different areas. So zero trust basically will target when the devices are connecting, authenticating, authorization is occurring, connecting to the cloud or your environment.
Yep.
SIEM is basically when the basic device is connected and how is basically behaving, how is basically sending the information, what events are occurring when the device is connected and whatnot. Similarly with SOAR and similar with the XDR. So I won't go into that because of the interest of time. But what I would say is that learn from zero trust because that's where authentication authorization occurs. Then build up your knowledge set.
Ah, that's amazing. Yes, I really love that because, like, yeah, like you said, there's a lot of different ways to get started, and it's going deep
Yeah,
before you go broad in
absolutely.
cybersecurity because it is, like you said, it is such a fast evolving field right now.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
And we're yeah, so let's just say someone does this. They focus on zero trust. They break in with a company like Amazon and they're working under you. They're super excited to be there. They're really young in their career. What are some of the ways that someone who is young in their career can stand out and like in a cybersecurity role?
I think I always believe that action speaks louder than words, right? Because
Mm.
if you can basically show your competency, your capability, then you will go far. I mean, with AWS, one of the beauty about AWS is that there is no bureaucracy. You basically show what you're capable of, and then obviously you will proceed ahead. And being AWS or Amazon is such a vast company, you could actually move from one organization to another based on your interest. But if you're basically staying within cybersecurity, there are many areas within cybersecurity of different services. I mean, we have services which are databases, which you can connect to database. We have something called API gateway. This is where you connect your gateway, your functions, external API endpoints calls into the system. We have so many services. We have serverless lambdas, right? AWS Lambda. You also have edge services for AWS IoT, like AWS IoT Greengrass, right?
Mm.
All of these services, there are so many, but the key aspect stays the same. Every single one of them requires security. Every single one of them. So this is where your interest in cybersecurity comes into effect, where you say, you know what, I'm interested securing databases, connecting databases. When the customer is trying to connect to database, you can focus on that. If you say to yourself, you know what, I basically have more interest rather than databases, I have more interest, let's say machine learning services, because obviously they need to have the data coming in and out to build the model of machine learning. You can focus on that to make sure how can you secure this environment because the data is the new oil, right? Data is very critical. And this is where you say to yourself that I can shine by showing my competency. If you have a competency, your actions will speak louder than your word. You need to basically show what you have identified, what you think are could be the issues if this thing basically is causing any issues for the customer maybe, right? For example, let's say,
Yeah.
if you say, oh, I basically think we can improve this feature, go ahead, write a one pager. You can write a pager and send it to your manager. He will look at it and say, yeah, okay, go ahead, build it. show it.
Yeah. I love that. And we will end with that. So you were amazing. I really enjoyed this conversation. It was really fun talking about the machine learning and cybersecurity and a ton of great tips here at the end on how to actually break into it. So thank you so much for being here today. This was an awesome episode.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. And I hope that people who are out there get this motivation to join the industry. And always, as always, I'm happy for people to connect to me on LinkedIn. Ask me any questions on LinkedIn or Twitter. I always try to make sure I help people whenever they ask me a question.
Perfect. You are the man. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a great day.